let's talk about Pedro Pascal, his scandals, and his past. There has been a lot of talk about actor Pedro Pascal lately, from his dancing suggestively with a rainbow lightsaber to him telling co-star Dakota Johnson she should open a fans-only account, which is disgusting coming from a 50-year-old man telling his coworker to do corn. Essentially, even if it was only a joke, let's imagine a coworker telling that to a woman younger than he is, and HR would have been on that immediately, or, I mean, if it were any other male actor as well. And also because he's been cast in so many series and movies because he's Hollywood's latest attempt to destroy real masculinity and force upon society a feminized, non-toxic male hero. However, aside from his strange behavior, something that has also become clear is that within the woke, progressive, virtue-signaling Hollywood elite, Pedro Pascal is where he is because he claims to be Latin, or rather Latinx, and a refugee. As a Mexican who lives in Mexico City, this bothers me, and on our other Spanish channel, I've already made multiple videos regarding these fake Latino celebrities who can't even speak Spanish, haven't lived in the countries they claim as their own, and use it as a way to climb up the minority victim ladder, all because they don't want to admit they are just American, because according to their ideology, that's a terrible thing. So for a few recent videos I made on our Spanish channel, I began to research Pedro. As I was going through his IMDb, because I still cannot understand at what point he became Hollywood's leading man, I noticed that around 2014, when he was cast on Game of Thrones, he changed his last name to Pascal. I found this interesting, especially given his incessant talk about being a proud Chilean and a refugee. So I looked for what reasoning he gave for this name change. He has stated that he changed his last name from Balmaceda to Pascal in honor of his late mother. However, once I tell you about his past, the real reason for the name change might have been to hide his family's history from the public, because he and his family lived most of his life in the United States, and as he has said, his family had to flee from Chile when Salvador Allende was overthrown with a coup from Augusto Pinochet in 1973. The way Pedro has told the story, his parents were young university students who were liberal but had no political involvement. However, in Spanish media, they make it very clear that his parents were members of the guerrilla party Revolutionary Left movement, and not only that, but that his mother's cousin was the nephew of Salvador Allende. They then had the necessary connections at the top to eventually flee to Denmark and then settle in the US, which is a privilege that many others were not afforded, including those tortured and the estimated 2,300 who lost their lives during the coup and the dictatorship. His mother, Veronica Pascal, was a child psychologist, and his father, Jose P. Balmaceda, was a fertility doctor who eventually established his practice in the cushy parts of Irvine, California. It was in this fertility clinic that was connected to UC Irvine that the secret Pedro and his father have tried to hide with the help of all of his Hollywood connections unfolded in the 80s. His father, Balmaceda, Jose Balmaceda, was a pioneer of a fertility treatment called gamete intra-fallopian transfer, or something like that. It's a really long name. And eventually, along with two other associates, Ricardo Ash and Sergio Stone, they launched the Center for Reproductive Health. And I've already made my position in IVF quite clear before, but I just don't agree with it. But it quickly fell apart when in 1995, the Orange County Register reported that Dr. Jose Balmaceda, along with Ricardo Ash and Sergio Stone, had taken women's eggs without their permission and given them to other women who later bore children from those eggs. At least 15 live births resulted from the improper transfers, and the clinic was shuttered following the egg theft scandal. In 1996, the Orange County Register even won a Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for breaking the story and showcasing the Pandora's box of pain, grief, parental rights, and ethics that this caused for the families. And thanks to these initial investigations, which were not prosecuted because at the time, for some reason, stealing human tissue was not a crime, it was also discovered through an audit that Balmaceda, along with his associates, had failed to report about $1 million in clinic income and pocketed tens of thousands of dollars from cash payments coming from patients. A federal grand jury indicted Ash, Balmaceda, and Stone on multiple charges of mail fraud and income tax evasion. UC Irvine also had to pay out at least $27 million in settlements to the traumatized couples and then fend off 139 other lawsuits from patients whose eggs were taken without their permission and implanted into other women without the knowledge of either of them. And this is where I want to read a bit from an article from 1995 by the LA Times. So this is from the LA Times from 1995. It says, fertility doctor who fled US is welcomed in Chile, which is also worrying. Medicine patients flock to Jose Balmaceda, formerly of UC Irvine, but his arrival may add scrutiny to his field. And I just want to scroll down to the bit that I actually want to read, which says, Balmaceda left Orange County this summer, while officials from at least 7 agencies were investigating him and his partners, Dr. Ricardo Ash and Dr. Sergio Stone. He sold his home and later put his wife and 2 youngest children on a plane bound for Chile. Going back. The couple's 2 oldest children, one of them being Pedro, have chosen to remain in the United States. More than 2 months ago, Balmaceda applied to join the staff of Las Condes Clinic, one in only 5 clinics in Chile that offer assisted fertilization. And I just wanted to read that to make clear that it was actually written. And so Pedro Pascal's father once again was forced to flee the country that had welcomed them as refugees and given him and his family the opportunities which Pedro is still taking advantage of today. Balmaceda and his wife Veronica eventually divorced in 2000 after having settled back in Chile, where he was working at the very exclusive Clínica Las Condes in Santiago, and sadly, a few months after the divorce, Veronica took her own life. However, it was not until 2014, when Pedro began to gain notoriety from Game of Thrones, that he decided to change his last name from Balmaceda to Pascal, lest anyone were to Google his last name and find the multiple articles that were written at the time describing his father's crimes. Just recently in 2024, during the Gladiator 2 premiere, was Pedro seen alongside his father and his sister, who used to be a brother, Lux Pascal, and that's a whole other can of worms. But that you might be thinking, how was the disgraced and fugitive Jose Balmaceda allowed back into the country? Because back in 2022, very quietly, he came back to a federal courthouse in Santa Ana and signed a plea deal was given a $750,000 bond. Should we blame descendants for the sins of their ancestors? I don't think so, but ask those who are demanding reparations, be it in the US, Canada, or Australia. Should Pedro be blamed for the crimes of his father? No, but should he show at least a bit more humility when he speaks so forcefully against the country that gave him all the opportunities that he is now taking advantage, including his superior status as a minority in Hollywood only because he claims to be Chilean, latinx, and a refugee? If more of his fans or those who admire him knew that he has been doing his best to keep this a secret, changing his last name, and continued to profit from this woke ideology and discourse, making himself into this perpetual victim, would they continue to support him as much? Would this impact him being cast in everything as Hollywood's last-ditch attempt to give us a new version of non-toxic masculinity? I mean, aside from everything else that has been coming out about him, we'll see how Fantastic Four, the Materialists, and Eddington will do now in the box office, that people are growing tired of him and his fake virtue signaling. So now you know a little bit more about Pedro Pascal's actual family history. Like and subscribe. We do 3 shows daily about pop culture and politics. Thank you for getting all the way to the end.